And today we're going to be talking about the highs and lows of being a digital nomad. And Natasha is a seasoned business strategist and coach who has spent a decade helping small business owners to design efficient, lifestyle-friendly businesses. Natasha splits her time between Canada and Australia and will share her personal insights and experiences on what it truly takes to live and work on the go. Welcome, Natasha. Do you want to start by just sharing a little bit about yourself?
Oh, hi, Lee. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be back in the North American time zone so that we can actually have this. I think you provided a good background. I am a business coach and consultant. I've been doing that for a long time, about more than 10 years. And yeah, so now I am still coaching, consulting, but I'm doing that in a more remote way, perhaps. And yeah, that's what we're here to talk about today, which is living a digital nomad style, busting, lifestyle, busting a few myths around that, talking about some of the good, the bad, and the unusual perhaps about living a digital nomad lifestyle. So I'm eager to get into that and share some of my experiences with your audience today too.
Fantastic. Well, it certainly is a hot topic, especially with a lot of companies requesting team members to spend more time in the office, and a lot of pushback. In fact, in Canada, government locations have been experiencing some serious pushback from employees around back to office policies, along with companies like Amazon, who've had to sort of revert back their tough stance on digital online life work situations, right? So thank you for talking to us about this. And, you're certainly a success story in that you've lived and worked in many different places. You're an extensive traveler. So I know that you're always out and about and doing work wherever you happen to be. So what initially inspired you to become a digital nomad, and how has your journey been evolving over time?
Mhm. So it's really interesting because when I reflected on the whole digital nomad, it has a little bit of a, I don't know, maybe a myth around it. So I'm going to dispel that. But I
Mhm.
really feel like I'm the OG digital nomad because I've been traveling and working abroad since I was in my 20s. And it started way back of I'm leaving Australia, I'm going to Italy to study Italian, and I never went back to Australia, basically. So I continue to work and work abroad. And, back in the day, there was no such thing as a digital nomad. You just worked overseas. That's really what it was. And, I think that's changed a little bit now, but that really is what started my journey. So I lived in Italy, I worked in London, I worked on a cruise ship, I went back to London, I went to New York, I was in Sydney, I was in Toronto. So I've been traveling and working that way, and it's just sort of been a normal part of who I am and what I do for my whole life. But I think today there's because of what we've been through globally, people have started to get a taste for that remote work, working in a different location, working in a different way than they have ever before in the 9 to 5 kind of the 9 to 5 realm. And I think what we had a taste of during COVID and the pandemic and the whole work from home was really just a different way of working. So when we talk about being a digital nomad today, and in terms of my lifestyle as a digital nomad, I think probably the first myth that I want to bust a little bit is being a digital nomad doesn't mean you have to move from place to place every week, every month, every whatever. You can spend extended amounts of times in other locations in a more nomadic lifestyle. So that's sort of my journey. I've been fortunate. Before I ran my own business, I worked in corporate, but I was just fortunate that I had a lot of opportunity and the right skills that people needed wherever I was. So I think just to sort of set the stage, I think as a digital nomad today, that looks a little bit different because I think it has the added context of the remote work piece in it as well. So maybe if we just sort of start there as to sort of set the differentiation of working in a different country in a regular 9-to-5 job versus what I sort of think the nuance of a digital nomad is working in a different country and not being in the 9-to-5 kind of office environment.
Yeah, and working at in different time zones, and whether it be remote work or living abroad, different, rediscovering different dreams that one might have, especially, I think the pandemic really helped us to put in perspective that life is short and you could benefit from living your life the way you really desire to and what your dreams are. And life is short. We have to take advantage of these opportunities while we're healthy and able to.
Absolutely. And that was a big part of it for me when I first started traveling. I'd say I was young, but I'd finished school. I'd been very sick when I was in my late teens, had an unexpected life change, which triggered for me very early on that I wanted to do as much as I could and have fun and live in exciting places and do the things that I wanted to do. So, it's kind of come full circle for me. I've done the travel and moving around, and then I settled in Canada and I was here for 18 years. And now I'm at that other end of my career where I feel it's time to reignite the travel spark and just be a little bit more flexible and living in different locations. And again, we'll talk about sort of the pros and cons of that. But I first want to say, it doesn't matter what stage of your life or your career are at, you can do this. And there's a lot of choices to be made if you choose to live this digital nomadic lifestyle, as it were.
Yeah, so I love that you talk about it in terms of highs and lows. I think that, no experience is perfect, whether it's entrepreneurship. I mean, I just finished recording a podcast talking about, the fact that entrepreneurship is far from glamorous. Sometimes I think it gets this rap of being, traveling to doing TED Talks all the time and, fancy networking parties and, selling your company for tons of money. But the day-to-day existence of it can be somewhat isolating and lonely. And so that's, one of the reasons why I started my Women in Biz Network, is to help people feel less alone. So, I guess that there are some lows in terms of a digital nomad lifestyle. So could you elaborate on what, from your perspective, are some of those issues?
Yeah. Well, first I want to say this is it's very, the whole entrepreneurship world and that kind of glamour or mystery around that is a little bit, I think, true for the digital nomad space. And what I will say is I think being a digital nomad is a little easier if you are an entrepreneur, if you run your own business and can call your own shots, because a lot of organizations haven't caught up, or the infrastructure is just not set up yet to support what a lot of people might like to have as a digital nomad lifestyle. But I think, you've touched on a few of the things. I think some of the biggest challenges, and of course, my nomadic lifestyle right now is between North America and Australia, which are a polar opposite ends of the earth. There's significant time zone difference. It's anywhere between a 14 to 16 hour time zone difference during the day. So I'll start there. For me, that was very challenging because of the type of work I was doing, consulting with clients, and a lot of my clients were in North America. So that initial transfer over meant I was working either very early in the morning or very late at night, which again were not great for my lifestyle, right? So I'd say thinking about the time zones you're going to be in is really important. The second thing that you touched on, which I think can be a real low, and I'll talk about some resources later, but I'm in a lot of digital nomad networks. And so I hear the same, issues and challenges people have, but, your network is, whether it be a friend network, whether it be a business network, whether it be a sporting network, it's hard to reestablish those in different locations, and especially if you're moving around a lot. So if you're really doing a full out digital nomad experience where you're 3 months here, 3 months there, 3 months wherever, it can be very lonely and isolating. And so I think you really have to I've been lucky because I have a strong familial base and friendship base in Australia, as well as my North American counterparts. And because of the travel I've done when I was younger, I have good connections in Europe. So I've sort of over the years established these communities. And I think that's critical, because I think you can, it can be very isolating, very lonely, and it can affect your business if you don't have those networks. So being part of, how I've overcome that is, got involved in local community activities. I love to dance. So when I went back to Australia, I went to a ballet class. I got involved with a local community organization where I was volunteering. I attended meetup groups. I started my own Facebook women's entrepreneurial meetup group. So I really had to make and even though I had friends, they were working in a 9-to-5 job, so they really weren't in the same space that I was in. And even still, I think it's important to make friends. So I think there are a couple of big ones: time zone, the community. Excuse me. A big thing that people really need, or two big things that I think people really need to think about in a digital nomad world, is taxes can become an issue, and where you're resident for taxes really is a challenge, particularly if you're more established and you have property, or you have rentals, or you have anything like that. You need to do your homework and get the right professional support around that. And the other one is healthcare. So again, it hasn't, because I'm either spending significant amount of time in Australia or significant amount of time in Canada, I either fall into one of those camps. But if you're moving around a lot, healthcare and insurance can become more of an issue. So just some things to think about. They're not insurmountable, but it's not like House Hunters International, where they said, oh, I popped over to, Italy and I began living there, there's visas to consider, there's legal things to consider. I'm a citizen of Australia and Canada, so I don't have to worry about that. But if I was going to some countries and wanted to spend more than 3 months, then I would have to do the visa thing. So there's all these little administrative things. So I think if someone was thinking about doing that, I would just encourage them to think about the location that they were going to be in, or the locations, and sort of have a checklist of all of those things that they need to follow up on. I think they are some of the biggest challenges, pitfalls, but the friendships and community is a really big one. And if you sort of sit back and wait for people to come to you, then you're going to end up being very lonely in this digital nomad space.
Yeah, I think that's great that you talked about some of the challenges in terms of financial, taxes, that sort of thing. I never would have thought of that. That's a really good point. And then also loneliness, right? Making friends, right? Loneliness, isolation, it's a real global problem that I think a lot of people are experiencing, is loneliness. And so putting yourself out there is important. Recently, someone I know's son was traveling around Europe and did hostel stays, and the hostels would put on these cool events for the people staying there to get to know each other. I thought that was just brilliant.
Yeah.
And
Well,
he's, yeah, said that it was really
there's,
fun.
there's a lot of, we'll talk a bit about the resources now because I think it's relevant. In a truly, and this is what I mean, there's sort of the distinction, and I think if people are considering doing this, then they want to think about what is the lifestyle do they want to live? Do they want to just go sort of for 12 months and go 3 months here, 3 months there? That's very different to saying, I want to spend a year in Australia, I want to spend a year in Canada, I want to spend a year in Europe, whatever that is, Southeast Asia, whatever that is. But there's more and more communities now for digital nomads. So there's co-working spaces that you can go and attend. There are co-living providers that you can work with now. One of the providers that I was going to have been looking at is called Hackers Paradise, and some friends of mine have been on that, and that's specifically for digital nomads where they sort out your accommodation. They have a working space set up for digital nomads. They have social events for digital nomads. So you've kind of got this instant community of people doing the same thing. The flip side of that is if you go into that very structured environment, you're going to be with other North Americans, Australians, English-speaking Westerners. You may or may not be experiencing the local culture in a very authentic way. I mean, there's a balance of that, but I think that's what you need. People really need to think about it and perhaps underestimate it. Just as an example, in December, I'm going to Argentina for about 8 weeks for some digital nomading, but more for holidaying and enjoying myself. And as part of that, I'm going to a language school for 4 weeks. I'm doing a dance class, immersive for 2 weeks. So I'm doing things that would really immerse me into the local culture versus going to stay at a very sanitized co-working kind of space. So it just depends what you want to do. And the last thing I want to say about that, because I have traveled around a lot, people think, oh yeah, great, I'm just going to be like slot into the local community and be best friends and go over to people's places for dinner. That doesn't happen. It on the odd occasion it does, but you've got to remember as a digital nomad that if you've got to think about yourself. If someone was coming to Canada for 3 months, how much effort would you make to include them into your life and make them part of your life and show them around the city and, be their best friend if they're only coming for 3 months? So I think there's a bit of a reality check of you don't just slot into any community just like that. And often if you're a bit more transient, people are not overly interested in becoming, your best friend for 3 months. It's different when you're in your 20s versus when you're in your 50s, so that's maybe another downfall or caution of what this lifestyle really looks like.
That's a really interesting perspective. And so it sounds like you go with goals in mind of what you want to get out of the experience and then figure out a way that best is going to meet those goals. So thanks for sharing some of those really useful tips. So can you walk us through a typical day in your life as a digital nomad? Like, what does that mean to you? How do you manage work while you're constantly on the move?
Yeah, well, right now, my digital nomad looks like me packing up things and calling movers. That's a big part of my day right now. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. But, I would say a couple of things. My business looks a little bit different as a digital nomad. So I'm not working the same way that I did in my business previously. I'm not necessarily trying to radically grow my business to a multi-million-dollar business. Now, if I were, I think my day would look pretty much the same wherever I am, I still have my work day, and I would talk to people, I'd do podcasts, I'd be doing digital programs, I'd be doing whatever work I usually do. But I think that's why I think the expectation of how you live your life as a digital nomad versus in a home base, and this is where I think a bit of the fantasy is. You see a lot of influencers on Instagram. It's like, oh, I'm living my $1 million dream, and I'm here, I'm there, I'm Costa Rica, I'm up here. For a lot of digital nomads, and I see it all the time in the chat groups around this, people are saying, how do I make enough money to live? Right? So, I think the day in the life of a digital nomad can look very different, depending on what kind of work you do. As I say, mine looks pretty similar to what it did before. I work with clients a couple of days a week. I haven't been doing too much social media right now, but I don't have a heavy workload, I guess, is the point around this. So I think it is important, if people are considering to do this, to think about what are the things they need in place in their life that can financially prop them up a little bit. Whether that's renting out your house at home, whether it's living in a cheaper location, whether it's taking contract work so you can do work in sort of shorter bursts of time. I think that's how you would, I think that's how you can more effectively work. And again, it depends where you are, because if you're in the same time zone, that's fine. If you're in a completely different time zone, not always as easy to have a regular 9-to-5 kind of job. So hopefully that gives you a little insight into that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your approach of having different streams of income has always been brilliant. I know that, you invest in real estate, and you're all about working smarter, not harder. So I really admire you for that. I think you've definitely mentored me from that perspective. Why reinvent the wheel if someone else is already out doing what you could do? Then maybe partner with them versus going and starting it from scratch yourself. So
Right.
I think that can really help. So thank you for giving us, a realistic approach to how to do this in a way that won't leave you feeling, um, challenged emotionally, financially. I think you've got some really fantastic ideas there. So I guess you mentioned that you try not to you don't take on the kind of work that you may do when you're situated in one place for a long time. So you manage your workload, and you have, like we talked about, different means of income. But do you have any tips for someone who really needs to bring in that income to do it in a way that like, your work smarter approach? You always have such great ideas that way.
Yeah, well, I want to answer that question. And before I do that, I just want to kind of touch on something you said before, is I think you need to have a goal as a digital nomad. Is your goal to travel and experience lots of things, to go, I love learning languages, going to learn a new language? What is your goal for, and I'll come back to that question, but what is your goal in being there? Because from my perspective, this is just my opinion, but if your goal is, I want to go and live somewhere cheaper, because Canada, I'm just using Canada because we're here, but like Toronto's getting really expensive. I could do the same work that I'm doing here in South America and live for a quarter of the price, right? So that's one goal. It's just like literally a financial goal. So you kind of just exchanging like for like, right? I'm doing exactly the same work I am here in Mexico, but I'm living for a quarter of the price. That's one goal. The other goal is I want to go and I want to travel and I want to experience the culture and I don't want to be working all the time, right? That's a very different, and it's why I work a little bit differently, because I'm not really there to try and make, you know, 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures when I'm traveling. I'm there to experience the culture. I just happen to do some work while I'm there. So I think it's a great question, Lee, in saying, you know, if someone really financially needs to be making the big bucks, I think they really would need to investigate where they're going to be and what kind of work they can do, right? Because there's nothing worse than getting into another country and not being able to afford to live or pay your rent or whatever there is. So I think you need to have some kind of base, you know, maybe like 3 to 6 months worth of saving where you can go and you can be comfortable and you can set that up. On the flip side of that, you may decide, I don't need to make as much money as I did when I lived in Canada. So in terms of the work smarter, that might be part of it. Doesn't mean you have to make less, but it might be part of it. You might say, hey, you know, look, I used to have making up 10 clients a month and do lots of coaching with them or whatever that is. Now I only need 2 clients a month. And I live somewhere much cheaper. So, you know, I think to answer your question, again, a lot of people I see in the chat groups and digital nomads are like, oh, how are you making so much money? And how can I make so much money? That's not it. You have to decide what work you want to do, what work you're good at, what work brings you in the kind of revenue you need. But then I think you can start to look at your lifestyle choices and say, can I live a little cheaper in another country that can free me up more time? Look, by the way, you can have like a multi-billion-dollar business and be a digital nomad. That's fine. I think the reality is that's a very small percentage of people that are doing this are actually in that level. I see a lot of people that are, I mean, there's a lot of young people that are, you know, just starting out and it's not such a big deal. I also see people at the other end, people like at the back end of their career where they're financially pretty stable and they're saying things like, you know, I sold my big house. I mean, I did this, like I sold my big house in Toronto and I downsized. And so then I was financially able to sort of sit back a bit, but I didn't want to be completely retired yet. So it just depends what end of the spectrum you're at. And I go back to the point, if you want to make that the big bucks and work hard, that's fine. You can do that, and you can do that in another country as well. I think the same rules apply no matter where you are as to how much effort you need to put in to get the results that you really want to get. Might be
Those are some really
hire
good
people
tips.
in other locations as well to help you with things, you know, with your social media or your admin or your marketing or whatever, right? So they're the things that I think people need to take into consideration if they're thinking about, again, the digital nomad life seems, it's a little misleading because again, it sort of conjures up, I'm moving around a lot all the time. But it might not be that for everyone, right? It could be, I go for 3 months or I go for a year and try this out. You just really have to see what fits in best with your lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that you talk about getting help if your goals are that you want to continue to work a lot, but you still, like, if you're going to the effort and packing and all the things to relocate, taxes, paperwork, like it's a lot, it's a big commitment. So why do it if you're not going to enjoy the experience of the culture and taking in where you actually are living? So I like that you mentioned that you could hire you know, people to support you. And chances are, if you're in a country where the cost of living is lower than where you originally were, then you could really end up being, it could be a huge financial advantage. So that's a good thing to remember. So it's important to choose where you're going to relocate carefully, right? Because there are certain places that are more expensive than, Toronto, which is a very expensive country. So like, you would want to try to, if you're going to do this, it would make sense to try to find a place that has a lower cost of living, and hopefully has a lot of things that tie into the goals that you mentioned, the things that you want to do, which is great. And I love that you go doing all these different experiences. So I'm going to live vicariously through you. And my
I
biggest
want
fear
to
is,
point out something. You know, being a digital nomad doesn't have to also be in a foreign country. So I just wanted to kind of point that out. You know, you have a
Huh.
fantastic cottage. You have times of the year where you go up there for, you know, the summer, and a lot of people here do that. I mean, that is being a
Mhm.
digital nomad as well. So it's, for me, it's just not being in your home, your regular home. It's about being somewhere else. So I think that's something also for people to consider. They could be a digital nomad, or live in a different place, whatever you want to call it, even in their own country. There's lots of places you could go out to the country. You can go to the cottages. You could go to another province. You know, there's lots of different ways to cut this up, to get all the benefits you want. But I think if we come right back to it, it's like, what is your purpose of doing this? Do you want to live somewhere more cheaply? Do you want to work less? Do you want to immerse yourself in a new country and culture? Do you want to run away from the world and escape whatever is going on here? You know, you just need to think about what your rationale for doing that is. And you can start it in really small doses. Someone might go, they might not own a cottage, but they could rent a cottage for the summer and see if they like doing that. They could go on a 3-month trip and see if they like doing that. So you can take little baby steps and start experiencing this kind of lifestyle very easily, frankly.
That's a great reframe. Yeah, you don't have to go to place far away in order to have the experience. And actually, I think and fantasize all the time about how I could spend more time at the cottage. But first, my youngest has to finish high school. But I am getting that much closer. So, I love that you remind me that,
You're kind
I
of doing
definitely.
it, Lee. You're already doing it.
Yeah, I am. You're right. You're right. Because we did get to the point now where we can be in our cottage all year round. I have a hot tub waiting for me at the cottage that I can't wait to get back into. I've been here for almost a month, full time in Toronto, and I am definitely looking forward to spending some time once I get back from Nova Scotia, to be back up my cottage, which is definitely, a few years ago I could not have been a digital nomad because there was no unlimited Wi-Fi, and we now finally just 2 years ago got that. So
Yeah. And
the
by the
increase.
way, the Wi-Fi issue is an issue that I see in the digital nomad communities all the time. Where can I go that has like amazing internet, you know, good internet that I can do my job that I need to do? And so that's part of it. If you need internet on a daily basis, you need to choose where you're going to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So looking forward, how do you see the future of work and travel evolving, especially for digital nomads or just remote work in general?
Yeah, well, I think you know, I think one of the biggest challenges right now, or again, some of the biggest challenges are things like the healthcare, the universal healthcare options, the kind of universal tax option, and even like a visa option, right? Like particularly if you want to do anything in Europe, the EU kind of requirements now are no more than 90 days in a 180-day period, as an example. So, you know, like that means it's very difficult to go and live for a year in Italy or Spain or Greece, or, you know, you need different kind of visas, which require more paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. So in a fantastic future, there would be a lot more, it would be a lot easier for people to this is my, I don't know, 50-year vision, but hopefully it could happen sooner than that. But you know, really like a tax box for digital nomads, right? It's like, you guys, if you're a digital nomad and you declare as digital nomad, here's where you pay your tax, and we split that between the 5 countries that you live in, for example. Or there's a digital nomad visa where you say, hey, this is, I'm on this digital nomad. That some countries do have that now. But you can easily come in and out of countries more easily. There's still a lot of barriers to this kind of travel, and it requires, again, like a lot of administration to navigate through that. So in a perfect world, in the digital nomad world, I think that could be a lot easier. In terms of the future of remote work, you know, that's an interesting conversation. You know, there is some real balance of some jobs you need to physically be there, you know, like a doctor needs to be physically there, a nurse, anyone in the healthcare, they need to be physically there. We talked about Amazon, you know, there's some roles in Amazon that might not need to be physically there, but people in the factories or packing, you know, they might physically need to be there. I think that organizations, it's so interesting, you know, they were able to adapt so quickly to a remote working infrastructure when there was a burning platform, and now it's reverting back, right? And it's all too hard, and the barriers are coming back into place, and all those traditional barriers are coming back into place in the workplace to make sure people are in the office, that they're being controlled, that the oversight is there. Again, which has its pros and cons. I like the community aspect of that, but you know, there was a lot of positive talk in the pandemic and of like, oh, this is a new way of working, we're going to move around that. But I don't think there was a real commitment to working differently in the future. It was like, we have to work this way, so we're going to, but we don't really want to. And I'm just saying, the big the organizations feel a little bit out of control when people aren't in the office. So what I would like the future to be and what it actually will be is yet to be seen. I think entrepreneurs are the future of that, always have been, in terms of allowing people to work flexibly, work flexible hours, work in different locations, come up with some kind of universal pay bands that makes sense. You know, sometimes it's funny, it's like, well, if you're living in, I'm just going to use Mexico again, but if you're living in Mexico, it doesn't cost you as much, so I'm not going to pay you as much. But as the organization, I'm still making as much. The work you're doing for me is still the same value. I'm not losing money because you're in Mexico. So I don't know what to say, but I think the infrastructure of the workplace needs to keep up pace, and is not keeping up pace with actually creating sensible solutions for more remote working. That's my philosophical view on that.
I agree with you. I was actually talking to my students about that, you know, that we were diving into human resources, and, you know, the fact that now in Canada it's legal to ask for Canadian experience, but yet, you know, companies are always trying to get around it by asking, you know, is English your native language, and all this kind of stuff. And it's just really unfortunate that we don't have a more global approach to work. I think that would solve a lot of problems, because, you know, the bureaucracy of our taxations, and, you know, how different it is to, you know, even for us to be able to go to the US, like, you know, most jobs, even if they're remote, requires you to be a US citizen. And it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think that, you know, if we have the UN and we have these global organizations that are supposed to be looking at us as global citizens, then we should be looking at making work more flexible in terms of how we're paid across borders.
There's a lot of, look, there's still a lot of scarcity mindset.
Mhm.
We're seeing it every day. There's scarcity. We think people are going to take our jobs. We think that immigrants are good, bad, whatever, like all the rhetoric that we're hearing every day, is simply not true. The more educated people are, the more we share resources, the more we put like diverse perspectives together, the more we're going to have for everyone. But that's a long way off being a general way of thinking, and it's all, people have power by not supporting that. So that's somewhere down the track, and hopefully truly global organizations. I've worked for a lot of global organizations, and they've been pretty good about like giving you opportunities cross border. But there's always been a visa that needed to happen. There's always been a tax situation that's been a challenge. There's always been some other issue that has to happen at a legal and like country level for that to happen. There's not an EU of work, right? Where there's free passage between multiple different countries. If you think about the EU, that's probably the closest to a little bit of a micro community where you can kind of travel freely around and do things. But I think corporate wise, we're a long way off from that.
I agree. And hopefully the right people will be listening to this and may get inspired to advocate more for us change makers who, want to be able to work, live, and play and make a difference globally. So thank you so much for sharing your insights and for giving us some tips and tricks and things to consider. So Natasha, as we wrap up, we always ask our participants to give us 3 takeaways or ideas that they can act on now. So do you have anything that if someone was considering this lifestyle but has never done it yet, what they should do to get started today, like in terms of planning, goal setting?
Well, I think the first thing is think about your goal. Why? Really dig in deep and do a bit of thinking. It's like, why do you want to do it? So what we talked about before. Do you want the cultural experience? Do you want to financially less expensive? Do you just want to change your scenic? Think about what that is, because that will guide a lot of the other decisions you make around that. So think about that. I think the second thing is, if it's not all or nothing, that's what I've said, like start dipping your toe in a little bit. So even if you're in a corporate job, maybe you're able to ask your boss if you can take a month off and try working from a different location. Or if you have your own business, think about that, and also think about doing that in your own backyard. And the last thing that I think people just need to recognize with this lifestyle is that there are some sacrifices that need to be made. So you really need to think about that. You're going to be away from your family, friends, some of them you might want to be away from, but you're away from your family, friends, things that are familiar. You're away from your native language, potentially. You're going to be living in different cultures where people do things differently from you. And my opinion on this is you need to try and assimilate to their culture versus expecting that other people are going to, come over and act like we do in Canada. So I think that's it. Think about your goals, start dipping your toe in, and if you go and do this, go with a very open mind and soak up every part of that experience. It won't all be great, but most of it will be great. So just soak it in. And I think we said it before, Lee, life's short. And if this is something that's speaking to you, don't leave it until you're 60, 70, 80, think about how you can start getting a piece of that into your life right now.
Exactly. Well, travel insurance is still relatively inexpensive, and you don't have health issues that, makes getting insurance difficult. Yeah. So thank you so much, Natasha, for sharing your valuable insights about the highs and lows of being a digital nomad. Your journey has offered a candid look into both the rewards and challenges of this lifestyle. So for more information on Natasha's work, or for her simple business blueprint, visit Inspire and Drive. And thanks for listening. So just in closing, is there any last words or anything that you want to share about what's next for you, or anything that you want people to know about you?
Yeah, well, I'd say what's next for me is a trip to Argentina, Ecuador, and Mexico in the next couple of weeks, and then back to Australia. So lots of travel. I'd just say this: if anyone's thinking about this lifestyle and has any questions, you can reach out to me through the website, through my email, through LinkedIn. I'd be happy to chat with anybody, and if any other digital nomads are out there. I encourage you to get in touch, join the digital nomad groups, and start building a community of other like-minded people. I mean, that's what's in store for me, to continue traveling and building that community with other like-minded people.
Well, maybe our ChangeMakers collective can help you be able to share resources and ideas with other like-minded folks. So again, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you on the Empower Hour, and until we meet again.
Thanks, Lee. Have a great day. Bye.
You too.